Sir, you can't come in here dressed like that. The museum security guard's dismissive words echo through the crowded entrance as 86-year-old veteran Frank Morrison stands at the door of the Veterans Museum, wearing his old work clothes and clutching a faded photograph. Behind him, hundreds of dignitaries and military officials wait for the grand opening ceremony. Unaware that this humble old man holds the key to the museum's most prized exhibit, what happens when they discover who this inappropriately dressed man really is will leave you speechless. If stories about hidden heroes move you, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, have you ever been judged by your appearance? Stay with us, because Frank's true identity is about to shut down the entire ceremony. Frank Morrison had been looking forward to this day for months. The new Veterans Museum was opening in his hometown, and he wanted to see the exhibit about World War II. He had driven his old pickup truck downtown, parked on the street, and walked slowly toward the big glass building. Frank was wearing his usual clothes, old jeans, work boots, and a faded flannel shirt. At 86 years old, he dressed for comfort, not fashion. The museum entrance was packed with people in fancy clothes. Politicians wore expensive suits, military officers had on their dress uniforms, and wealthy donors showed off designer outfits. Frank felt out of place, but he had every right to be there. This was a public museum, and he was a veteran who had served his country. Security guard Marcus Webb was having a stressful day. He was 24 years old and had been working at the museum for only 2 weeks. His supervisor had told him that today's opening ceremony was very important, with lots of VIP guests attending. Marcus was supposed to make sure only properly dressed people entered the building. When Marcus saw Frank approaching the entrance, he immediately decided the old man didn't belong. Frank's clothes were clean but old and worn. His boots had mud on them from walking across the parking lot. To Marcus, Frank looked like a homeless person trying to crash an important event. Sir, you can't come in here dressed like that, Marcus said loudly, stepping in front of Frank. Frank stopped and looked confused. Excuse me, son. Marcus pointed at Frank's clothes. This is a formal event. You need proper attire to enter. There's a dress code. Frank looked down at his outfit, then back at Marcus. I didn't know there was a dress code. The invitation I got in the mail didn't mention anything about that. Marcus laughed sarcastically. Invitation, sir? This is an exclusive event for dignitaries and donors. I don't think you received an invitation. Frank reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Marcus. Here's my invitation. Marcus barely glanced at the paper before handing it back. This could be fake. Anyone can print something like this. Look, old man, I'm trying to be nice here, but you need to leave before I call the police. People around them started to notice the argument. Well-dressed guests whispered to each other and pointed at Frank. Some pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Frank felt embarrassed but tried to stay calm. Son, I'm a veteran. This is a veterans museum. I have every right to be here. Marcus rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure you are. Every homeless guy in town claims to be a veteran. It's getting old, buddy. The insult hit Frank hard. His face turned red, but he kept his voice steady. I'm not homeless. I'm a decorated veteran who served this country for over 20 years. I just want to see the museum. Marcus wasn't listening. He was focused on the growing crowd of onlookers and felt pressure to handle the situation quickly. His supervisor had told him to keep undesirable people out, and Frank definitely looked undesirable. Look, Grandpa, I don't have time for this, Marcus said rudely. You're disrupting an important event. Either leave now, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing. A woman in the crowd gasped. Several people started murmuring that this seemed wrong, but Marcus felt like he had to follow through with his threat. Frank stood his ground. I'm not leaving. I was invited. I'm a veteran, and this is a public museum. You have no right to keep me out. Marcus grabbed his radio and called for backup. Security to the main entrance. I need assistance removing a trespasser. Within minutes, 2 more security guards arrived. They were older and more experienced than Marcus, but they trusted his judgment about the situation. What's the problem here? Asked the head of security, a man named Robert Chen. Marcus pointed at Frank. This guy is trying to crash the ceremony. He's not dressed appropriately, and I don't believe his invitation is real. Robert looked Frank up and down. The old man certainly didn't look like the other guests. His clothes were shabby, and he seemed out of place among all the fancy people. Sir, Robert said to Frank, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private event tonight. Frank's patience was running out. For the 3rd time, this is not a private event. This is a public museum opening. I received an invitation in the mail. I'm a veteran, and I want to see the exhibits. The crowd was getting bigger. People stopped their conversations to watch the drama unfolding at the entrance. Some were taking videos with their phones. A few people in the crowd started to feel sorry for Frank, but nobody spoke up to defend him. Robert decided to end the situation quickly. Sir, you're causing a disturbance. If you don't leave immediately, we'll call the police and have you arrested. Frank looked around at all the faces staring at him. He felt humiliated and angry. These people were treating him like garbage just because of how he looked. Fine, Frank said quietly. Call the police. I'll wait right here. Robert was surprised. Most people would have left by now rather than face arrest. But Frank just stood there, calm and determined. Marcus called the police, and within 10 minutes, 2 officers arrived. The crowd grew even larger as people gathered to see what would happen next. Officer Janet Martinez was a 15-year veteran of the police force. She had dealt with many situations like this and knew how to handle them professionally. Her partner, Officer Tom Bradley, was younger and less experienced but willing to learn. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Martinez asked Robert. Robert explained the situation, making Frank sound like a troublemaker who was trying to crash an exclusive event. He showed the officers Frank's invitation and suggested it might be fake. Officer Martinez examined the invitation carefully. It looked official to her, with the museum's letterhead and proper formatting. She turned to Frank. Sir, can you tell me your name and why you're here tonight? Frank straightened up and looked the officer in the eye. My name is Frank Morrison. I'm a veteran, and I received this invitation to attend the museum opening. I want to see the World War II exhibit. Officer Martinez noticed something in Frank's voice, a dignity and strength that didn't match his appearance. She had learned over the years to look beyond the surface when dealing with people. Mr. Morrison, do you have any identification with you? Frank pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license and veteran's ID card. Officer Martinez examined both documents carefully. The veteran's ID showed that Frank had served in the Army for 22 years and had been honorably discharged. His driver's license showed a local address. Everything seemed legitimate. Officer Martinez turned to Robert. Sir, this gentleman has proper identification and a valid invitation. What exactly is the problem? Robert felt defensive. The problem is his appearance. This is a formal event with important guests. He's not dressed appropriately. Officer Martinez looked at Frank's clothes again. They were old and worn, but they were clean. Frank himself was clean and well-groomed. He didn't smell bad or appear to be drunk or mentally ill. Is there a written dress code for this event? Officer Martinez asked. Robert hesitated. Well, no, not exactly, but it's obvious that guests should dress formally. Officer Martinez had heard enough. She turned to Frank. Mr. Morrison, you have every right to enter this public museum. Your invitation is valid, and there's no written dress code. These gentlemen cannot legally prevent you from entering. The crowd murmured in surprise. Some people started clapping. Marcus looked shocked. He had been sure the police would remove Frank, but Robert wasn't ready to give up. He stepped forward and addressed Officer Martinez directly. Look, I understand the legal issues, but this is a very important event. We have senators, generals, and major donors here tonight. This man's appearance will be disruptive. Officer Martinez's expression hardened. Sir, are you saying that this veteran doesn't deserve the same respect as your other guests? By now, the argument had attracted the attention of some very important people. Senator Patricia Williams, who was scheduled to give a speech at the ceremony, pushed through the crowd to see what was happening. What's going on here? Senator Williams asked. Why is everyone gathered around the entrance? Robert quickly explained the situation to the senator, hoping she would support his decision to exclude Frank, but Senator Williams had a different reaction than he expected. Let me understand this correctly, the senator said. You're refusing entry to a veteran at a veterans museum because you don't like his clothes. Robert started to explain about maintaining standards and protecting the event's image. But Senator Williams cut him off. This is absolutely disgraceful, she said loudly. This gentleman served our country, and you're treating him like he's not good enough to enter a museum built to honor people like him. The crowd was now completely focused on the drama. People were taking videos and posting them on social media. The story was starting to spread online, even before it was resolved. Frank stood quietly through all of this, maintaining his dignity. Despite the humiliation, he clutched his faded photograph tighter and waited to see what would happen next. Senator Williams turned to Frank. Sir, I'm Senator Patricia Williams. I want to personally apologize for how you've been treated tonight. Would you please join me as my guest for the ceremony? Frank nodded gratefully. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your kindness. But the drama wasn't over yet. As Senator Williams escorted Frank toward the entrance, Marcus made one last desperate attempt to stop them. Wait, Marcus called out. I still don't think this is right. What if he causes problems inside? What if he embarrasses the museum? Senator Williams spun around, her face red with anger. Young man, the only person who has embarrassed this museum tonight is you. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus realized he had made a huge mistake, but it was too late to take back his words. As they walked into the museum, Senator Williams asked Frank about his service. She learned that he had served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He had been wounded 3 times and had received several medals for bravery. What's in the photograph you're carrying? The senator asked. Frank smiled for the first time that evening. It's a picture of my unit from World War II. I heard there was going to be an exhibit about the war, and I wanted to see if any of my buddies were mentioned. They walked through the museum halls until they reached the World War II exhibit. Frank stopped suddenly when he saw a large display case in the center of the room. Inside the case was a collection of photographs, documents, and medals. At the center of the display was a large photograph of a group of soldiers. The caption read, "The Heroes of Normandy, the 82nd Airborne Division paratroopers who led the D-Day invasion." Frank stared at the photograph in amazement. Senator Williams looked at it too, then at the faded photograph Frank was holding. "Mr. Morrison," the senator said quietly, "is that you in the museum photograph?" Frank nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "That's me, second from the left. And this," he said, holding up his personal photograph, "is the same picture. I've carried it with me for almost 80 years. Senator Williams looked more closely at the museum display. She read the detailed description of the 82nd Airborne's role in D-Day, including the names of several soldiers who had shown exceptional bravery. One name jumped out at her, Sergeant Frank Morrison, who had single-handedly captured a German machine gun nest and saved the lives of 12 fellow soldiers. "Mr. Morrison," Senator Williams said in amazement, "you're featured in this exhibit. You're one of the heroes this museum was built to honor." Frank looked at the display again, reading about his own actions as if they had happened to someone else. He had never thought of himself as a hero, just a soldier doing his job. Word of what was happening spread quickly through the museum. Military officers, government officials, and museum staff began gathering around Frank and Senator Williams. Everyone wanted to meet the D-Day veteran who had almost been turned away at the door. WWII, a 4-star general who was the guest of honor for the evening, pushed through the crowd. When he saw Frank, he immediately stood at attention and saluted. "Sergeant Morrison, it's an honor to meet you, sir." Frank was overwhelmed by the attention. He had come to the museum just to quietly look at some exhibits. He never expected to become the center of attention, but General Hayes wasn't finished. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered around them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly, "I want you all to meet Sergeant Frank Morrison, one of the bravest soldiers in American history. This man jumped into Nazi-occupied France on D-Day and helped win the most important battle of World War II." The crowd erupted in applause. People were taking pictures and asking for Frank's autograph. The museum's official photographer started taking professional photos of Frank with the exhibit. Meanwhile, back at the entrance, Marcus was learning about the consequences of his actions. The museum director, Dr. Sarah Johnson, had heard about the incident and was furious. "Marcus, you just tried to prevent one of America's greatest war heroes from entering his own museum," Dr. Johnson said angrily. "Do you understand how serious this is?" Marcus tried to defend himself. "I was just following procedures. He didn't look like he belonged here." Dr. Johnson shook her head. "You judged a man by his appearance and nearly caused a public relations disaster. This incident is already going viral on social media. We're getting calls from news stations wanting to interview the veteran who was denied entry. The security company that employed Marcus fired him the next day. The museum also implemented new training programs to make sure nothing like this ever happened again." But the night wasn't over yet. General Hayes made an announcement that shocked everyone at the ceremony. "Due to the disgraceful treatment of Sergeant Morrison at the entrance tonight, I am canceling the scheduled ceremony," General Hayes said into the microphone. "Instead, we will hold an impromptu celebration honoring Sergeant Morrison and all the veterans who have been overlooked or forgotten." The crowd cheered. The planned speeches were canceled and the evening became an informal gathering where people could meet Frank and hear his stories. Frank spent hours talking with visitors, sharing memories of the war and his fellow soldiers. Many people thanked him for his service and apologized for what had happened at the entrance. The story made national news the next day. Videos of Frank being denied entry went viral, along with footage of the impromptu celebration that followed. The museum received thousands of messages of support for Frank and criticism of their security procedures. Frank became a local celebrity overnight. He was invited to speak at schools, veterans events, and community gatherings. But he remained humble, always emphasizing that he was just one of many heroes who had served their country. The museum created a permanent exhibit honoring Frank and other local veterans. His photograph was enlarged and given a place of honor. In the main hall, a plaque next to it read, "Never judge a hero by their appearance." Marcus learned a valuable lesson about treating people with respect, regardless of how they look. He eventually found work in a different field and became an advocate for veterans. Writes. The incident changed how the museum operated. They implemented policies to ensure all veterans were treated with the respect they deserved, regardless of their appearance or economic status. Frank continued to visit the museum regularly, but now he was always greeted as an honored guest. He would spend hours talking with school children and young adults, teaching them about history and the importance of serving others. The faded photograph Frank carried that night was eventually donated to the museum, where it was displayed next to the official D-Day exhibit. The museum's description noted that Frank had carried the photo for nearly 80 years as a reminder of the friends he had lost and the mission they had completed together. Senator Williams kept in touch with Frank and eventually sponsored legislation to improve services for elderly veterans. She often told the story of meeting Frank as an example of why we should never judge people by their appearance. General Hayes retired from active duty a few years later, but remained close friends with Frank. He often said that meeting Frank reminded him why he had joined the military in the first place. to serve alongside heroes like Sergeant Morrison. The museum's opening night, which was supposed to be a celebration of military history, became something much more meaningful, a lesson about respect, dignity, and the importance of honoring our veterans not just in words, but in our actions. Frank Morrison, the humble, old man in work clothes who almost wasn't allowed into his own museum, became a symbol of the hidden heroes living among us. His story reminded everyone that true heroism doesn't wear fancy clothes or demand attention. It simply serves others, quietly and without complaint, for a lifetime.